Welcome to the Red Ink Revival Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Norris. We're going to grow your leadership through neuroscience, psychology, and theology. Hello and welcome to another episode of Red Ink Revival Leadership Podcast. I'm so excited today to talk about parenting your kids' sexuality. It's going to be an amazing conversation. I have Dr. Todd Bowman with us. If you don't know who he is a psychologist and behavioral neuroscientist. He's the associate professor of counseling at Indiana Wesleyan University. He's an adjunct professor of counseling at Liberty University and an adjunct professor of the Intro to Psychology at Nazarene Bible College. He's an author and editor of Reclaiming Sexual Wholeness, and he also is a psychological assessment giver as a psychologist to seminary candidates. And so he gets into the psychology of pastoral and ministry leaders. And for me, the thing that is best on his resume is that he's one of our fellows at the Red Ink Revival Leadership Podcast and all of our different experiences. He's married to a wife, Rebecca, of 17 years and has 3 children, all boys. Todd, man, I'm excited about today's conversation.
I have been looking forward to this for quite a while now, and just the stories of raising boys that I bring to this conversation and I'm happy to share. I think we're gonna have a lot of fun talking about a really important topic, a really serious topic, but I think we'll do it in a way that brings some levity and gives parents some hope, right? That this process of stewarding our children's sexuality, as daunting, as intimidating as it can be, we can do it well, and we can do it in a way that prepares them to navigate the challenges of a really sexualized world that we see right now.
Yeah. Well, one of our early episodes, we were just conversing about various things, and you just kind of pulled out this comment where you said that if a dad or if a parent does not mentor and lean into the sexual health of a child to help form the ideas, the boundaries, the processing of thought, that the negligence of that will create a traumatic experience for them. That's one of those wows. I've quoted that several times. I even had a pastor friend of mine last week reach out to me, and he said, hey, could you help me understand how to actually parent your teenage boy or your girls, your kids on sexuality. So I thought, man, we need to do an episode on this. Let's hit it. Why do parents, do you think, tend to maybe not talk about sexuality with their kids? What is the aversion? What's causing them to be like, oh Lord, I'd rather do anything than to have that conversation?
Yeah. You know, one of the things I find as I observe culture, Patrick, is as sexualized of a culture as we are, I mean, go look at the magazine rack as you're checking out at Walmart or wherever. So much sexual imagery, sexual language. I'm really curious about how magazines, Cosmopolitan comes to mind, has to publish the same article about the most mind-blowing orgasm ever. Every volume of the magazine seems to have the same article around that. So right, that should be a one-time article. If you figured it out, you've communicated it. Now everybody knows it. But apparently,
I was doing some research and I saw an article in Vogue Teen on teaching teenage girls, young 13, 14-year-old girls, how to know if they're horny.
Wow.
What's going on in their vagina, etc. The tingling, and I'm like, holy moly! Yeah. This is targeted. Yeah. This isn't just around the corner. It's not hidden in the shadows. This is targeted.
Well, okay, so back to your question. Maybe that's part of the struggle, and I would suggest that it is. Is in spite of all the intensity of sexual imagery and content that's available to us, we're really a sexually illiterate culture.
Yeah.
And that a teenage girl has to get informed by a magazine, a passive, impersonal, non-relational third-party information source, instead of that being communicated to her by a loving parent who, as their mother, right, as a woman, understands the mechanisms of sexual arousal, understands. But it's amazing, as I travel around the country, as I speak, the amount of sexual illiteracy. We just don't know our bodies. And I think some of that, church culture-wise, not to point fingers, but we've lived in such a culture of secrecy and shame around sexuality in the church.
Yeah.
And I think now there's this tension point of those of us who are, 35 and older, raising kids or teenagers, like the script our kids are living off of and the world that they've inherited operates with completely different sexual norms and challenges and even language than what we were exposed to.
Yeah.
So if what we got was silence,
Yeah.
which was backfilled with a sense of secrecy and shame,
Yep.
right? Like our kids, it's just in their faces all the time.
Yes, all the time.
Which means we have to stand in the gap. We have to find a way to bridge that discrepancy and experience.
Yeah.
We can't use the same playbook, which is passivity and disengagement and, well, like, we didn't get any sexual formation and we turned out okay, but like, it'll happen for our kids too. That's not gonna happen. I think back to the trauma piece of that, right? It's traumatic to withhold information about the functioning of one's body. Right? Is it intrusive? Is it big T trauma? No, it's probably little T trauma.
Yeah.
It's in that neglect realm, but it's significant.
Yeah, it
right?
is.
Given how important sexuality is to our bodies. And I don't mean that like in the secular frame of reference.
Right.
Like sexuality is my only thing. It's my most important thing.
Yep.
I don't mean like that. Critical as far as God's design for relationality.
Yeah.
God's design for our physiology. Right? And we will today delve into some of these aspects of its importance, but I don't mean importance like it needs to be considered sacred in the way that secular society considers our sexuality sacred.
Yeah.
But it's of critical importance in God's design for marriage, reproduction, and even bonding.
Yeah.
And if we have time, we'll get into some of this post-orgasmic space neurochemically and how the quality of relationship that gets carried forward is not defined by the quality of the sexual experience pre-orgasmically or orgasmically.
Yeah.
It's really this post-orgasmic space and how we build trust and safety and attunement and bond, attachment,
Yeah.
which we've talked about in previous podcasts, really emerges from that space. But again, like we have no real frame of reference or not good literacy in the church around that. So with that, I think as parents, we're oftentimes intimidated.
Yeah.
There's this discrepancy in experience. We're threatened by like, what do my kids know? What don't I know?
Yeah.
So I think being able to tune into our own stories is important, like as a starting point.
Yeah.
What is our story?
Yeah.
What was our sexualization? What was our sex education? I wrote a book called Angry Birds and Killer Bees, talking to your kids about sex. I'll never forget the conversation I had with my mom. First conversation I had after it was published. Oh, I'm so proud of you. Like, this is going to be such a great contribution. I remember that one conversation I had with you, and I was like, crickets on my end, right? I'm like, I don't remember this conversation, actually.
Right.
No, that one time.
Yeah.
And I thought, like, this is so interesting because the working title, before it was named Angry Birds and Killer Bees by the marketing department, was Sex Talks, right? And the subtitle was Sex is Talking to Your Kids, Are You?
Oh my goodness.
Right? Like built on my own lived experience of like, I don't have a lot of messaging here, right? Like, I've got one conversation that apparently happened, but like, again, psychologically, it wasn't enough to anchor me in the reality of God's design for human sexuality.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So that book is really written about like, how can we help, millennial parents, people my age, 38, 39 and under, really wrestle with what is the story of sexuality in American culture right now, and how do we help kids navigate that? And
just so I don't forget, is that book on Amazon? Where would somebody get it?
You can find it on Amazon, you can find it at Christian book distributors, you can find it at Mardell's, wherever.
That's awesome. So I think about my own maturation, or evolution would be a better way to say it, of my understanding of sexuality. Growing up, I got one talk that was about a book that said that mama and daddy horses make baby horses. And that was it. I remember seeing that, and that was the extent of my sex talk. My mom and dad had some Christian books on sexuality and good sex and stuff of that sort. And so when they would leave the house, my older brother would go get their books and he would read it, and I would stand on guard looking out the window to see if they were coming home. And then I would run in and say, "What did it say? What did it say? What did it say?" And then he would try to share with me a little bit, but at that point, he's got power. He doesn't need to tell me anything. And so I got various, nothing. Most of formation for me came from the locker room. It came from a bunch of guys just talking about stuff, and then of course there was the unusual presentation of a pornographic picture or magazine for which, I didn't have a lot of contact with. And then, of course, the movies that as I got older, the movies were informing. I was watching a video of a Christian gal that today leads young leaders, her and her husband, and she was talking about that when she was a teenager, she didn't get any talks except for the anatomy talk. It was about the physical parts of the body, and that was it. And so she got her mentoring and formation from movies and books. And she said as a young teenager, she was sexually active and didn't enjoy it. It wasn't something fulfilling for her, but she thought, this is what I'm supposed to do, and there was no testing of that. Yeah. What I find is, in fact, this gal actually broke it down into 4 different categories, which I really like this, that we either come from an environment as a child that is a silent environment, we just don't talk about it. We come from a saturated environment where it's always talked about, it's demonstrated in front of us, there are no boundaries around it. Or we're from a third category, conflicted environment, which is what the church does, because you have the
do as I say, not as I do.
Yeah, yes.
Right, like don't do this, and then the parent is evidencing that, or...
Yes, which again is that sex positive, sex negative conflict. I don't know which one I'm supposed to be. Yeah. And then you have the fourth category, which is what you and I are endeavoring to walk people through, is an intentional environment of how to not let this sexual formation in our kids, this health in our kids, to be random or some way just happening in their lives. And it's never too late as a parent to get involved, to get, even if your kid is a teenager, it's never too late for you to begin the conversation. But you were talking a moment ago about how this interaction with your mom post book being written was, I remember that talk. And I think first and foremost, we want to come back to say that this isn't a task. This isn't a one line. This isn't a one conversation. It is such a conversation over days and weeks and months. It's constant and consistent of checking in, of mentoring, so that it is normal for your kids to know, I have conversations with my dad, with my mom about this, and it's not taboo, it's not weird. I remember myself walking through some of this with our now adult sons. We have 2. One is 26 now and one's 23. And I had a series of books that were age appropriate. And I remember when we got to some of them, they just giggle, and I'd have them one-on-one, and they'd just giggle, and I'd giggle with them. It'd be like, this is hilarious. I'm putting myself in their mind as to what they're experiencing. And when they got to early teenage years, they got to see drawings, body parts, and they're like, they want to look, can't look. And I'm laughing, I'm howling with them. It's so real.
Yep.
And
you feel that tension with them, right?
In the tension with them, exactly. And letting them see this is funny. There are neurochemicals that are awkward and uncomfortable. In some ways, we're trying to figure that tension out, but there is no shame here. This is not a shameful part of our relationship together. Well, that now then means that when they're 26 and 23, I have a normalcy to lean in and have a conversation about anything that doesn't now feel like it's off limits. It feels like I'm invited into it. So I think it's so critical that we have that. Hey everybody, I want to slide right in and interrupt the conversation. I want to ask you to do us a huge favor. If you can go to wherever you get your podcast and review it. Give us a review and give us, 5 stars. It would be such a help to promote our show in Apple and in other places. Also, if you could like it and share it, if you watch it on YouTube, if you will comment about the joy or the thrill or the insights that you're gaining from it, I want you to know that every comment becomes a catalyst for somebody else. Again, it would be a huge favor to us if you'd do that for us. Now let's go right back into the conversation. You are clearly an expert. You are an expert in addiction matters that even specifically are around sexuality, but you're also a person who's extremely skilled and competent in the area of positive sex. So I'd like you, if you would, talk about how you as an expert, you have 3 boys, how you talk to your kids about sex, how you would encourage parents to talk about sex with their kids.
Yeah. I think one of our common misconceptions, Patrick, is we tend to wait until, in our imaginations, our kids are at an age where sexuality is important. And we introduce really critical conversations into a space that, to your point, right, like is defined by this awkwardness of development.
Yeah.
So it's probably the least appropriate space from a receptivity perspective, right? Like our kids are guarded and shut down. If we're starting to introduce a conversation around sexuality as they're uncomfortable in their own bodies, like that's just not the right timing. But that's kind of our default setting. Like, I better do this. Or typically the wife is like nudging the husband, like, you better talk to the boys.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, what we've missed out on is doing that. I call it sexual stewardship. Right? I mean, think about stewardship biblically. Right? Like we are charged with managing something in an honorable way that's not really ours until an appropriate time we give it to the actual owner.
Yeah.
If that's a fair theological definition of stewardship, right? Finances, time. I think it has to apply to our bodies too.
Yeah.
Right? That we steward our bodies, we exercise, we eat healthily, we steward our sexuality. And yet with our kids, right, like the blessing of kids can't not awaken a sense of stewardship.
Yeah.
And that idea of nurturing them, caretaking for them, growing something in them until such a time as they can take responsibility for it themselves in the full measure of their maturation.
Yeah.
Right? Like, so we're called to steward our kids' sexuality, which means we've got to think about kind of ages and stages. What age are they at? What stage of development are they in? And what can we be doing early that helps build and scaffold and move this conversation to when it does become awkward for them developmentally, there's a familiarity that's there. So you asked me, what did that look like with my 3 boys growing up, or what does it look like? A lot of it starts early with using biologically appropriate terms. Right? Like a penis is not Willie, a penis is not Jimmy, a penis is not Pete, right? Or whatever other pet name, right? Like a penis is a penis. Right? And right, like kids are just like, oh, that's my penis. Okay. Right? Like, I don't care what you call it, but you need to know, like biologically what it is. Because that's doing a couple things. It's giving them language that's going to carry through their lifetime. Because the doctor's going to talk about, does your penis hurt? Right? Like, so kids need to have biological, right? A part of that is about setting boundaries. Like, okay, so this is my penis, and at some point we're going to be like, your penis is private to you. Like, nobody should be touching your penis. Yes. Right? So we're establishing ourselves as experts. Wow, Dad knows a lot about the body. Like, he knows what that's called. I didn't know what that was called, but I know what it's called.
I like that. So that positions in their emotional framework that my dad or mom, whoever is going to be coaching them, and which both should at their appropriate levels. But that says to the child a bond to an authority on this topic. So I'm now not needing to go to my peers for the authority.
Or to the internet.
Yes.
Typically, the first source of expertise is the one the kid's going to go back to over and over.
Oh, see, that's amazing.
So like part of why stewardship is so important as a mentality is that like we're honoring the charge that God has given us with raising these kids by saying like, sex doesn't exist, like your sexuality, even at 2, we don't like to think about 2-year-olds in their sexual makeup. But they have genitalia. Right? Like they have skin, which is the largest sex organ in our bodies. Right? Like we have to be thinking about, if we're going to get them to this place in their development healthily, right? Like how do we do that along the way?
Yes.
A lot of that is specificity of information and establishing ourselves. Covering would be a way of thinking about this theologically. Like part of that expertise is about our covering over them. They can rely on us for what they need. They don't have to go find it someplace else. Right? And in that, right, there's a lot of messages, not just of here's your body and I can help you, right? Like if you have questions about your body, I'm the expert. We're also going to help protect them with some of those boundaries. right? Like here, right? Like you can wash your genitalia in the bathtub, right? Like, but nobody else should be touching your genitalia. And if somebody does, like here's the protocol.
Yeah.
Right. And at that point, it's just factual. At 13, right? Like our kids don't want to talk to us about anything, let alone if like, yeah, Dad, right? Like I'm gonna come talk to you if that happens, right? There's already so much like shame and anxiety and insecurity in their development at 13, 14, 15.
Yeah.
But doing that early, building that bond of trustworthiness, it's the foundation.
Huge.
It's the foundation of their story, and it's what a lot of us didn't get.
Yeah, absolutely. And then when they're 13, I would make formal appointments. I'd be like, hey, I want to set an appointment with you. You and I are going to pick up our next formal conversation on this. But all that is giving some level of path, some normalcy, some expectation, so that now I can have a conversation about what we talked about in that formal. I can talk about that anytime. When we talk about sex, we all know, some people will say, it's just sex. I mean, what's the problem with two people who seem to have interest to even have sex? I mean, it's biological, it feels good, it's a thrill ride, for everything from the fantasy expectation all the way to the climactic experience, and just the feelings of being alive and et cetera. So even hookup culture and anonymous sex, what could possibly be wrong? And yet we know intuitively that sex is not just sex. It is unique, it's in a category by itself, that there is something that happens in us when we have a sexual experience that's unlike if I ate a really good barbecue sandwich. It's different than if I went on a roller coaster ride at my favorite park. There is something that now changes my life. And of course, we know biologically that when the semen moves inside the female body, that actually is not just over once the interaction's over. It becomes a part of who she is. It becomes a part of her psychology. That's why when a girl is raped, it's different than being mugged. That if a girl's mugged, yes, she may need some counseling, but if she's raped, it's completely different. There's something sacred about sexuality that no matter what a religious context is, we know that internally. So a parent can't really parent sexuality or healthy sexuality within a child if they're not really sure what they think about certain things, where they are on these ideas. So it's incumbent on each of us to grow and learn.
Yeah, absolutely. And to double back to that, I think what you sparked in my mind, Patrick, was the sense of we have to overcome our fears.
Yeah.
Because if we're orienting to our children's sexual development with a sense of fear, we're always going to default to a place of control.
See,
and the things that we try and control in our kids' lives are more naturally going to be places where their protest originates.
That's just right there, everybody. We need to stop, rewind that, play that again, because that is a powerful statement. Can you remember exactly how you said that?
I'll paraphrase it. Like we have to recognize that our fear, if we're oriented to our kids' sexual development with a spirit of fear or a sense of fear, automatically we're going to control. Like fear awakens a sense of control. And when our kids feel a sense of control, the primary place they're going to push and protest,
oh my gosh,
is whatever we're controlling.
Yeah.
And now with the advent of technology, they've got more access and exposure. There's more opportunities to protest and kind of go off script.
Yeah.
And take their sexual development into their own hands.
Yes.
And I'm sure today we'll talk about some of the biology of the LGBTQ experience. And yet there's more going on culturally than scientifically what we would see biologically within that story of, right, like what percentage of the population is biologically maybe inclined toward homosexuality. Why do we see such a greater percentage of people identifying as that? Well, there's something more than biology going on, and how much of it is that sense of secrecy and shame and control then gets distorted. Sexuality gets distorted. So that fear, I think we have to start naming and identifying what we're afraid of.
Yeah.
Right? We're afraid that people will think negatively of us if we in the church, right? Like if one family in the church all of a sudden teaches their kid about sex and their kids start talking about sex, right? Like we become the scourge of the church because we violate the unhealthy rule of we don't talk about that here.
Yeah, right.
I think that's a very real fear for parents. Some of it is like we don't trust our kids.
Yeah.
Not like if I teach them about it, they're going to go do it. I'm sure there's plenty of folks who are afraid of that. That's what happens when you tell them at 13 instead of 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 7 and 9. Right, but we're afraid of what they'll do with the information, right? Like, because we do surrender a degree of control. I'll give you a story here. When my kids, my older 2, were 8 and 10, it was a beautiful May afternoon. It was Mother's Day, actually, is why I remember the day. One of my boys at Mother's Day dinner made a comment about something a classmate had said at school that runs contrary to what we believe theologically. I was like, oh, okay, like, mile marker, it's time. So at 8 and 10 years old, right, like having had all these kind of building up conversations, 8 and 10 years old, my oldest 2 got like the full Monty sex talk. Like no holds bar, right? Because, right, being attuned to their stories, like we've been doing sex education along the way, but now I'm getting feedback from them and the freedom that he had to even say like, I disagree with this, like my friend's an idiot. I'm like, whoa, like let's not
That's awesome.
be pejorative against people that disagree with what you believe. I'm glad that you believe that. Like I'm glad that we've socialized into healthy sexuality and understanding. But like now it's time. Like even at 8 and 10, people look at me like, there's no way I'm gonna tell my kids words like penis and vagina and semen and implantation and fertilization. Like I'm not sure how much of that my kids even understood technical.
Right.
But I'm planting seeds.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
But what they did have is a full-on, unadulterated, factual expression of, or explanation rather, of like, here's what sex is and here's what God designed it for, right? And we keep doubling back as they grow and have questions. We're afraid of what our kids are gonna do with that information.
Yeah.
So, what do the Bowman boys do with that information? Well, my first kid is super introverted, super shy, socially anxious, right? Like, he just absorbed it and was like, I never want to talk about this again. Yeah. Right? My middle kid, man, he's my like external processor. Yeah. Right? Ethan internalizes a lot. Graham, like, if he's thought it, it's out his mouth. So it's a few days later. So that was on Mother's Day, that Sunday. Wednesday, Thursday of that week, my wife was home with the boys after school, was coming home from work, and one of our family pastimes at our old house was playing soccer in the entryway. Like the front door was a goal, the entryway about 15 feet away was a goal, and my boys would play there, I would play with them. But this day my wife was playing with Titus, my youngest. He was probably 4, 3, somewhere between 3 and 4. Well, he's playing with my wife, and Graham is on the couch kind of looking through the entryway, watching them play. And you know, the youngest kid, he just picks up language, right? So he knows all this soccer language when he's young, 3 and 4 years old. And he kicks the ball through my wife's legs and he scores a goal. And he goes, Mommy, I nutmegged you. And without missing a beat, right, my 8-year-old with this newfound information, kind of playing on his iPad, as my wife tells the story, looks up, really cool. He goes, it's not a nutmeg. And you got to understand, right, the dynamic between the middle child and the youngest child, right? Like, yes, it was. I kicked it between her legs. It's a nut. Right? Like, Titus is now feeling invalidated by his older brother's dismissal of what actually happened. And classic Graham, he goes, dude, it's not a nutmeg. It's a vagina meg. And my wife, like, whips around. What did you say? He goes, it's a vagina meg, Mom. And she's like, what is a vagina meg? And like deadpan, newfound authority on all things human sexuality, he goes, well, Mom, you don't have nuts, so it can't be a nutmeg. And she's mortified, right? Like, right. So later that night, like she's recounting this story and we're like writing emails to his teacher, like, so we had the full Monty sex talk with Graham. If there's any new language being shared around the classroom, that's on us. We're super sorry about it, right? So like now we're feeling this anxiety of what's he gonna do with the information? Nothing ever came with that, right? Like in the safety of the home environment, he was metabolizing that information, but it never spilled over into, right? Like my dad told me that.
You're not gonna believe it. You're not gonna believe what it was.
This is what happened. Right, like that never transpired, but we project that into the future, like, and then what are people gonna think about us? That's what I mean by naming our fears. And there's probably as many fears that people carry as there are families
Yeah.
Right? Because those fears are rooted in our own stories and some of the unresolved business, pain, wounds of our own sexual stories.
Let me jump in again and tell you about two amazing opportunities for pastors, spouses, and senior leaders of ministry. We have a monthly, we do on Zoom. It's a 2-hour event every second Monday of the month throughout 2021. We also have 6-week modules that are called weeklies. So we have a monthly and we also have an opportunity for weeklies. The weeklies, we help you rediscover the deeper parts of your story. First, I want to dig down into our monthlies. We gather with Dr. Todd Bowman, who's a psychologist, neurobiologist, is on many of our podcasts. And then we have usually a guest who is a tenured minister, a strategist. And we, for 2 hours, will have 20 to 30 plus different people who are gathered together. We collaborate and you set the topic. We come out of the gate with a particular thing on our hearts, and then you want to talk about tactics, strategies, what to do in a political season or in a pandemic season, or what needs to happen in your marriage or your parenting. Maybe there is a parishioner that is just triggering you like crazy, or it's so complex you're trying to figure it out. Well, we've gathered together the best hearts, the best minds to be able to pull that stuff apart and then help you put it together again. So that is our monthlies. Again, it's free, doesn't cost you a dime. It's our gift to you. Then we have our weeklies. Our weeklies are with 6 as a minimum, up to 10. We have males and females that are set apart, and we help you understand the emotional drivers that have been driving you and what has actually inked your sense of identity. It's a profound experience. Our graduates tell of how life-changing it has been for them. We walk through your history and we help you make sense of your present. We believe that God wants to expose roots that are actually behind our behaviors. It's an amazing discovery time to really rediscover you. We help you redeem life and we help you re-dream ministry. We would love for you to be a part of it. Normally, I get $150 for coaching, $150 an hour. This whole program for 6 weeks in Mod 1 would be valued at around $900 of work. And yet, it is my gift to you. I would be honored to walk the journey and to go heart and heart and hand in hand with you. Both the monthlies and the weeklies are featured on Zoom, so wherever you are in the world, it actually is something you can do. Invite your pastor and ministry friends to jump on with you, and let's have a revival. All you have to do is go to redinkrevival.com for either the monthly or the weekly. Red Ink, REDINK, revival.com. Be sure to register, and I can't wait to see you at both.
And on the fear that, they're young, there's, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Man, they are so innocent. They don't know anything about any of this. We know that depending on which research you look at, some people are, in the research statistics show that the first exposure to pornography is when they're 7 years old.
Yep.
That's the earliest I've seen it, 7 years old. And that's through smart devices. Mama giving the phone over and kids learning workarounds, and they're having conversations at school to find out access points.
And a lot of that is relatively accidental.
That's
right? Like those first exposures, as Mark Glazer would say, there's the anonymity, the affordability, the accessibility of online porn that Al Cooper talked about. But Mark Glazer's edition of Man for Our Kids, because of the ubiquitous nature of smart devices, like they have access points that we don't ever think about.
Yeah.
And then once they're exposed at 7 years old, right? Like I've got 3 boys, or I've got an almost 7-year-old and a now 11-year-old. They talk about everything.
Yeah.
Dude, did you see this? Like, what's the new Fortnite skin? Have you played this? Like, it's just constant chatter.
Constant.
And it's relatively innocent, but as soon as there's something of like, boop, Like, it's going to be talked about, it's going to be shared, and then the social pressure is, well, I want to go know about this. Like, I better go see this. I better go find this out. So it is a fascinating.
And once you see it, it's confusing. Hook. It's chaotic. It's chaotic because there's conflict. There's something that doesn't feel right. But on the other hand, there's something about it that is very inspiring and energizing. And I don't even know what to do about it.
Well, and I think. What confuses me, right? So you said I'm an expert. I'll receive that. As an expert, what confuses me is how, for instance, in the state of Kansas, where we're at right now, if a person 18 or older gave someone a pornographic tape, image, video, access point, etc., the state of Kansas would consider that no different than physical abuse. Like, you've abused someone, you've traumatized someone.
Yeah, because in our expertise, we know that's true.
Yeah, it's not just a grooming process. Like, the seeing of that is traumatic. And somehow we consider it healthy development, exploratory, when Junior comes home and is looking at porn for 4 hours on the browser that his dad left up or his mom left up.
Yeah.
Right. To your point about like the physiological reaction, the confusion, I would say it's just as traumatic.
Well,
but we do this secular dance of like, well, that's grooming and that's not consent and that's inappropriate and it's traumatic. But like,
this isn't.
Right. We got to stay pro porn, right? Like, oh, well, like porn is fine. Like, porn is not fine.
Right.
Can we just say that? Like, porn is not fine, and not from a moralistic,
or religious,
churchy perspective.
Yeah.
Right. Like what it does physiologically, the boundaries internally and intrapsychically, how it takes away our no, because our body is having a conflictual experience.
Yeah.
This doesn't feel right, but it feels good.
Yeah.
Well, that's what's being mirrored on stage. No, don't do this. This hurts. Ow.
Yeah.
You stupid bee. Psh. Hitting, slapping, name calling, right? Like it's conflictual, and that conflict is reflected intrapsychically.
Yeah.
So like I'm 100% like sex positive.
Yeah.
Like in the way that God designed human sexuality.
Yeah.
Like I'm not sex positive in the way that integrates demeaning, boundary violating, demoralizing, abusive, humiliating, degrading experiences on tape.
Well, see, we know in neuroscience that the development of the brain takes, different age points are when different parts of the brain are fully developed. So it's traumatic on the brain because the brain is not designed to have that flooding of those chemicals at that age.
That age, thank you. That is such a critical point biologically.
Yeah.
That so much of the trauma is I'm seeing things, and we get body dysmorphia can originate out of this. There's a sense of shame and insufficiency. Because if I'm 7, I'm seeing a fully developed body do something that I have no frame of reference for making sense of. And it's exhibiting a biological response and orgasm that I'm incapable of.
Yes.
Because I'm 7.
Yes, that's amazing.
And there's...
And then the comparisons you were bringing up
absolutely.
there. Like my thing is not as big as their thing.
Yeah.
And, I could never create that kind of experience. That is amazing. As a pastor, one of the things that I have witnessed is that when young children, like 7, 8, 9, have accessed on a parental device, porn, and the parents found out some way, it usually is that the child was at school, there was conversations being made, somebody mentioned about they had looked up boobs of Disney characters. Disney is in the shows, the real actors and actresses, and they then thought, I'll just type in a search, Disney and boobs, and see what comes up. And the next thing you know, it is developing all of these images, these imprints on their brain. And so this is where the starting point of that happens. And usually they start with, their own age group before it even moves to some of the other things. But then they go back and it expands within days.
So here's, while we're on this topic of pornography, the really insidious nature of this. We're within, a few days of Pornhub shutting down MasterCard and Visa processing. They just took 70% of their content down because it's not verifiable.
Yeah.
Because there's lawsuits pending about rape films and underage films, right? Like there was no checks and balances. Not only is that insidious, but when I hear the stories of young people right? Like they were looking for Minecraft videos, and guess what they found?
Yeah.
Minecraft porn. Like who in their right mind creates pornography that's specifically targeted to
Yes.
a game that 6 to 12-year-old children are playing?
Yeah. Or even in research, there was, at one point, I don't remember the URL, but it had something to do with White House.
Oh,
White House.
Whitehouse.com as compared to whitehouse.gov. Coca-Cola at one point had to buy a domain back for $1 million.
Because
I talk about some of this in Angry Birds and Killer Bees. Pokemon.com, I think, at one point was also compromised.
Amazing.
And right, like these innocent things that kids are looking for.
There it is.
You know, I'll be honest with you, I've done enough work with folks who have come out of the industry, the porn industry, to know that the industry is not full of dumb people.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
They're brilliant marketers,
Yeah.
and they are way more attuned to the neurobiology literature, specifically the neurobiology of addiction,
Yeah.
than most of the general population. Like it is a specific, targeted, well-planned strategy
Yeah.
for exposing kids at younger and younger ages, getting that chemical hook,
Yeah.
right? Because some research would say that it's an awful lot like a heroin hit,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Getting that chemical hook in, knowing that if we can get that as their first exposure point, if they have no formation around sexuality, it's going to create shame and divisiveness. It's going to create this compartmentalized secret living. And we know addiction flourishes, it grows, originates out of that sense of disconnect. And then we've also neutered the parents' authority because they have no idea that it's happening.
Yeah.
On the phone that they gave Junior for their 10th birthday with no restrictions and no oversight and no conversation around how to manage this adult thing in a healthy way as a non-adult.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we think of this whole parenting side of it, the first thing that we're talking about is for a parent to understand where they land, where they fall on so many of these areas. So a parent needs to know what they believe about porn. A lot of Christian men and women are not really sure where they land on that. Well, you're not going to parent in an intentional direction that which you don't know where you land. And the same thing would have to do with anything that is sexually qualified as sin in the Bible. Anything that is a sexual sin in the Bible, it is important that a parent know what that is. And I would just suggest that when we talk about sin, let's, again, don't make it an OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder towards God having rules. It's not God just like, I got rules and I want everybody to abide. No, it's because God loves us and He knows that a violation of those things is going to kill, steal, and destroy our lives. So He loves us so much He hates sin. So really it's a relational thing. It's a love thing that God has to us. So we have to really clarify what is to us sin, what is, this healthy sexuality. And let me just throw out there's so much within Christianity that uses the word pure with the word sexuality, and my bias, it bugs me. I don't like it because I don't think that anybody can be fundamentally pure without the blood of Jesus. I think it's the work of Christ that makes us pure. I think the emphasis is healthy sexuality. It is following God's patterns and maturity in sexuality. But a parent's got to clarify that. So they got to know where they land on porn. And they got to know where they land on masturbation. Because masturbation is something that, again, today has so many, vague ideas to it. And if a parent doesn't have clarity on that, they're never going to mentor their kids well around it. And it can't be sex negative. It can't be, I hate the sexual experience and God hates the sex. No, it's got to be positive. So talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, please don't do that. Like I've worked with those couples where like that's their formation. Sex is bad, sex is dirty, sex is gross. And then on their wedding night, they're like, looking at each other like, please don't bring that thing near me.
Yeah.
And the husband's like I waited my whole life, right, for like this moment. And like now there's this tension that was probably falsely formed around the idea of purity.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Instead of what's healthy, what's authentic, what's God honoring, with what's, you're talking more about probably, as adults, but like how we steward our kids' sexuality has absolute implication for how they navigate their story once they become responsible for it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I've worked with those couples who've been married for sometimes years, Patrick, and haven't consummated their marriage because the intensity of emotion around.
In the name of God, in the name of church, in the name of the Bible.
In the name of this is so bad, and my body literally responded to those messages in a physical way, right? So now we're talking about spiritual, physical intersectionality.
Yeah.
Not like it's vaginismus is what it is. Like her body will not receive. It's emotionally related, but like it's tied to the emotions that were awakened because of the spiritual messaging.
And then you've got the huge demographic that is a little further forward than that, which is that we do the sexual act when we first get married and beyond, do the sexual act, but there is no vulnerability.
Yeah.
There is no
Just
transparency.
biological.
I can't just be present, which the sexual act is to bond two people in a way that only vulnerability can fully give. And so, if somebody's heard all the negative, and sometimes there's these undertow messages, like if you see a child who's looking at porn, why are you looking at porn? And then from that, you don't want to look at porn. And all of a sudden, there are these interpretations that are being put on that child. And the parent, in their fear and control, are simply projecting onto that kid their own brokenness and fragility.
Absolutely.
When what they could do, the healthy way, is if a child's looking at porn, no shame projection, not trying to create a dramatized experience around it, simply leaning in and saying, what did you think?
Yeah.
When you saw that, what did you feel? It's exploration, it's questions.
Yeah. What did you see? Right, like this is trauma resolution, right? Like, what did you see?
Yeah.
Like, what did you hear?
Yeah.
How did your body feel?
Yeah.
Right? Who told you about this? How did you find this?
Yeah.
Right? It's not why.
Yeah.
Unanswerable question for a kid. I don't care if they're 13, right? Why did you? I don't know.
Yeah.
They don't have access, right? So the how. How did you feel? What did you see?
Yeah.
Right? How often have you done this? Is this the first time? Have you done this a lot? Who told you about this?
Yeah.
Right? So that calm curiosity, retaining connection.
Connection, intimacy,
just
non-threat.
A feedback loop, right? Like sometimes we feel, I don't know, here's where I go with this. If our kids being exposed to something inappropriate in the home is the litmus test for the quality of our Christian parenting, you just need to be done. You just need, because the context that we live in, it's going to happen.
Yeah.
It's going to happen.
Right.
98% of boys are going to be exposed to pornographic content by the time they graduate high school. That statistic in Angry Birds and Killer Bees is probably from 2011.
Yeah.
I would say the
age is less.
Again, the ubiquitous nature of cell phones now and kids getting phones younger and younger and iPod touches and a host of things. It's going to happen. It's more a matter of, do we have a playbook for when this happens?
Yeah. Yeah.
And if we're holding on to, I've got to keep my kids pure, meaning never exposed to anything.
Yes.
Ultimately, we're setting ourselves up for failure. And out of that failure, to your point, we're going to project, and our own woundedness is going to leak out and totally derail their sexual development. Because now there's a pocket of shame, there's a pocket of fear. They've been exposed, they have this curiosity, but if we're not standing in that space with connection, curiosity, as an authority that can give them the answers that they were looking for, instead of an authority that's using fear to try and control their behavior.
How would you like to reboot your personal finances this year? How would you like to take control of your money, turning small wins into big results? I want to encourage you to check out my wife Tina's financial coaching business at tinanorris.org. You might be wondering, what is a financial coach? A coach is someone who will personally team up with you to outline financial goals, inspire you with energy, help you stay focused on your goals, and so much more. You can do it all through Zoom, and she provides a free initial consultation, so there's no pain or cost to you for your first steps. Maybe you've been to several Financial Peace University cycles, left with great intentions, but struggled to execute. You need a trainer, a coach, another human that won't shame or judge you to help you stay on track. Tina is a certified expert that will help you with clarifying financial dreams, understanding spending patterns, reviewing all financial obligations, assessing financial and insurance needs, defining a spending plan, understanding your emotional profile related to money, building margin for savings and emergency funds, learning strategies for attacking debt, and referring recommended financial advisors to multiply your tomorrow. And she isn't selling any products, policies, or investments. She is the ultimate financial teammate. As Tina's husband of 30 years, I can tell you firsthand how much of a difference Tina's skills and giftings have made. Our financial portfolio wouldn't be a fraction of what it is today if it wasn't for her. She works with clients that are single parents, everyday people, pastors and church staff, as well as high-income professionals. I've known executives of Fortune 500 companies that manage billion-dollar budgets at work, but then come home to complete financial disorder and disappointments. Shame roars at them as they face the stresses of marriage, kids, and struggling retirement plans. A personal trainer can change the way you think, emote, and behave. If you have friends, church members, clients, or even young marrieds that are launching their financial lives, you will do them all a favor to have them check out this amazing option. If professional athletes need a coach to win the day to fulfill their dreams, then you and I do too. And you won't find anybody better to help you get there than Tina Norris. Set up your free consultation from anywhere in the world today. Go to tinanorris.org to find out all the details.
Yeah, and part of that fear is that I'm trying to protect them from my story. I don't want them to repeat my story. So once something happens, the parent can feel like this uncovers how bad of a parent I am, and it reflects on my identity. It begins to break down as an earthquake internally of I am a failure, and it reminds me of my sense of loss. So that fear causes me to want to control as a parent. Then the fear of what about who they're going to become. Oh my gosh, they're going to be prostitutes. They're going to be gigolos. They're going to be doing stuff.
Serial adulterers.
Yes.
Yes.
Rapists. And who knows where that'll go from here. And we have to, what you said earlier, we have to really resolve or process through what those fears are for us, and not inadvertently weight our kids down with our issues. Yeah. And so I think that that's incredibly important. And again, not putting on the kids just fixes. And this is common within parents, is that whether it's this or 15 other things, it's, oh, you don't want to do that. Well, how helpful is that? That's not helpful. Yeah. And yet we all have done it, but that's not helpful. Right. What's helpful is to lean in to what you said, ask them questions around how they're experiencing it. And then, yes, on the heels of that, you can begin to guide them and say, this is what we understand about the body, even about the brain. Whenever you begin to develop patterns, it becomes a habit and repeatable. And there are people that have had very difficult lives because they have early on began to digest this stuff. So what we're doing is we're not fixing them, we're relationally bringing them into a conversation so that we can collaborate. Yeah. And even asking those questions, how did it make you feel? What did you think?
I think one of our strategies, and there's great tools out there for this, but I think one of our strategies in an effort to not violate the norm or the rule of silence in the church is to be passive in, let's just put a filtration system, let's put in an accountability software on all the devices, let's move the computer to the public area. All fantastic decisions. But if we're not, as you just said, relationally cultivating a sense of growth and maturation in their sexuality, right? Those are going to fail at some point. There's workarounds. The porn industry is constantly evolving in ways that create access points and any of that filtration, any of that accountability software is perpetually playing catch up.
Yeah.
It is not, it's a great decision, please do it. By itself, it is not a sufficient intervention because it doesn't involve relationally gifting your kids with you and your story, and using the relationship that God placed you in as their parent to help them navigate and make sense of and understand and make decisions based on what God says about human sexuality.
Yeah. And if your child has accessed early on porn, once they cross that line, now you have a further advantage and opportunity to lean in on that area. And what that looks like, at least that's the way that I think parents should approach it, it's the way I would approach it, is that if something like that happens, lean in on it throughout their lives and say, hey, have you accessed porn? Have you, engaged masturbation? Anything that has to do with the context of their life that they are now being aroused in some way. Being able to ask them, hey, have you experienced anything? And I will say this is huge for sons. Men and boys don't answer questions they're not asked. And the more general your question, the more general your answer. So you have to ask very specific questions. I know that whenever I work as a pastor with so many young people, I'll ask the question, if I have that kind of currency with them, I'll ask them, have you looked at porn recently? How are you doing with your healthy sexuality? And they'll be good. Well, have you looked at porn recently? Not recently. When's the last time you looked at porn? Last week. Well, see, in my mind, recent seems not recent.
The last 6 months would be recent in my book as a clinician.
Yeah. And then it goes from that to you begin to ask questions. Well, tell me how long you've been on. When you go and have a session, how long are you on? Yep. I even would ask, how often do you relieve yourself? Is it a 1 off, a 2 off, 3 off? How often does it happen? What I find is that they don't answer questions that they're not asked. And when you ask those kind of questions, it's not shame-filled. And I'll even tell them, hey guys, when I'm talking again with people within my pastoral duties, it'd be like, hey, there's no shame here. I care about you. I care about what your body is desiring. There's something you're needing. Yep. You're feeling something that you're being attracted to. That's what I care about. I'm not interested in managing the behavior. I'm interested in managing your heart and soul.
Yeah, like how do we get the underlying need met?
Yes.
Ultimately, right? Like that's pastoral ministry. Like how do we get the need met in a healthy way, a viable way?
Yeah.
Rather than a way that is distorted or doesn't reflect God's design for. And not just in the area of sexuality.
Yeah.
In general.
Yeah. It's like, Jay Stringer, who writes the book Unwanted. He has done enough research that he now, with individual case studies and interviews and so on, that he can tell what their need is based on wounds and negligence of their childhood up. He can tell based on that probably what they're searching for in porn. Mm-hmm. So even the actual porn search is a reflection of the heart and soul. Like we were talking earlier, sex is not just sex. It seems like sex and money are two of the most profound energy sources that gives us an x-ray as to how everything in our life is going in terms of the way we relate. And so asking good questions to just explore, to find out what's being needed there is absolutely incredible. Well, let's go ahead.
I want to add a quick point on top of that. So Pornhub.com does their annual year in review.
Yes.
And there's nothing pornographic on it, but as a sexologist, it's important data for me.
Yeah.
To go look at, and I'll be on the phone with one of my buddies and we'll access together, we'll shut it down together. So again, there's nothing pornographic about the year in review, but it's this fascinating report about how many hours worth of pornography were uploaded to their site in the last 12 months, the primary searches, and it breaks it down around the globe. Like you can see what people in Cambodia were looking at, and what people in Tanzania were looking at, and what people in Peru were looking at, and people in the US were looking at, and it's fascinating. But why it's so valuable to me as a clinician, to your point about Jay's work, is corporately, right? Like corporate meaning like the collectivity. As a country, it's helping us as clinicians make sense of what is capturing our sexual imaginations.
Yeah.
I go back to 2018, 2019. I'll be curious with the pandemic to see and it'll be published in January. I'll be curious to see what pops as far as primary top 2 or 3 types of pornography that are being selected. 2019, year in review, Pornhub.com, the top 3 were step-sibling porn, stepmom porn, and step-family porn.
What does that mean?
Incest, essentially. So blended families. So you know, and man, we haven't even talked about like the sexual energy in blended families. When you have non-biologically related people coming together to form a new family.
Yeah.
I call it the Brady Bunch effect. I know, like, it's
right.
nerdy. It's like, I don't believe what I know as a sexologist. Impossible for, at the ages of those teenagers on the Brady Bunch, right? Like, what we get is this Hollywoodized version of like, oh, it's so fun. And like, that's not the story that clients tell me.
Yeah.
Clients will tell me that sometimes their first sexual experience was a step sibling.
Wow.
And they fell head over heels. And then like she started hooking up with somebody from school and it devastated him because like in his mind, like there's this
bond,
novelty and there's an access point and it's,
wow.
And like if we're blending families, like it has to be after like, is this a healthy, viable relationship that as adults we're entering into? Once that is established, point 2, what is our plan? What is our course of action for ensuring the sexual safety of the kids as we blend this family?
Yeah.
Because we don't know our kids' sexual stories.
Yeah. Yeah.
Especially in contexts where there's been oftentimes divorce. There's just so much paying attention to the pain and the stress of that our kids' stories tend to get lost in the mix.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? So I don't say this theoretically. Like I bring years of clinical stories to bear and say there's a reason that Pornhub's searches in 2019.
Wow.
What are we looking for? Right? A young man looking for a mother's connection or approval.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Eroticized rage, right? Like a young man's disdain for a stepmom because he feels like she's replacing mom in dad's life.
Wow.
Eroticized rage, right? Like, let's go see that. Let's go watch porn where the man is degrading and having power over the stepmom.
Wow.
Right? Now, it's all fictitious, right? Like, it's just the plot.
Right.
But again, like, those searches reveal so much about...
taps the fantasy, and the fantasy comes from somewhere.
Yeah, it comes from our wounds.
And when you're talking even about the children's sexual stories, as a pastor, I have so many stories of other pastors and their kids as they got older, where a babysitter violated the child, abused, sexually abused. Then, of course, there's things where neighbors, you know, even when my kids were young, grade school, they would have friends in their class that would invite them over to their house for a play day. And one of the things Tina and I would first do is we would ask the question, does he have an older brother? Yeah. And if he had an older brother, no way, you're not going over there. And we took heat. But of course, we didn't tell that to the inviting parent, but there were parents that are like, why can't he come over? And we'd just be like, yeah, we would avoid it and jump around it and et cetera. But we were, even within ministry, there are different individuals within the church family that are leaders who violated the pastor's kids. And so we were just very protective of that. And today, it does seem like that there aren't nearly as many boundaries or thought through boundaries around it. Now, that doesn't mean that you can ever control it. You can't keep everything from happening, but you can mitigate some of those things. And so our kids sometimes have secret stories that they've never told anybody. I mean, I talked to, even, in recent years, I talked to somebody who, when, she was a young sister, her brother violated her. And she had never told her mom and dad in the adult years, and it's a heavy weight.
Yeah.
It's a big deal, and of course he spun out with different chemical dependencies, and everybody interpreted it in a lot of different ways. And once you find out the backstory, you're like, well, it all makes sense in context. He's trying to escape some of the just the trauma of what he did, and of course,
statistically, the probability is that whatever happened to him,
that he's traumatized by somebody offending him.
The reenactment is really his way of trying to metabolize and make sense of
what's
been done to him.
Let me break in one more time and tell you about RedInkRevival.com, REDINK Revival.com, and sign up for our blog e-newsletter. Every month it'll hit your inbox, and in it we'll have not only a provocative blog post by me and some of our other professionals, but also we will share with you our events, our monthlies, our weeklies, all the details are there. And I want to remind you to subscribe to the podcast. It's such a help to us. Review it, comment, like, the whole deal. If you share it to your friends when something lands for you, who knows how that could multiply our influence. And it'd be a gift to us, and it'd be a gift to all your friends. I just want you to know I'm holding you in my heart. We're praying for you. We believe that 2021 is a year of supernatural increase.
So you think of all of that, and then in this conversation around porn, we could be scaring the heebie-jeebies out of a young parent who's just got a baby that was born. And what do you say to that parent just before we go any further?
Stop living in fear. That's what we've been talking about today. Cultivate a healthy fear.
Yeah.
Cultivate a healthy fear, not a paralyzing fear, not an unreasonable fear, but we have to have an anxiety, an appropriate, right? Like, take it with, we do this with dogs, we do this with firearms, right? Like we have a healthy respect, right? There's a dimension of fear in that respect.
Yeah.
Right? Like that big dog could do some damage. Like, I'm gonna maintain a healthy distance. I'm gonna stay attuned to what that vibe is coming from the dog.
bet.
If it's looking angry, if it's growling, like,
Yeah.
Same thing with firearms, right? Like you respect them. Like this is capable of doing some serious damage. I would say orient to this conversation the same way, with a healthy respect.
Yeah.
Because like I am that dad who had a kid molested. And it wasn't an adult, it wasn't somebody in a creepy van
I'm so sorry,
driving
man.
through the neighborhood. It was the same age peer.
Same age peer.
Same age peer.
My.
And it was in the context of not even like a sleepover, it was in a, right, new people moved to the neighborhood, we get to know them, we let our kid go play. We didn't know that the kid that, like, all my clinical bells and whistles, right, like heebie-jeebies, we'll call them, right, like, kid gave me the heebie-jeebies for sure, right, and I was like, dude, never, you can play on his front porch, you're never going in their house.
Yes.
You know? Well, I didn't know that he was gonna be there.
Yeah.
And then it comes out, right, like in the basement. Thankfully, the mom overhears some things and comes and tells me, and we do a whole, this young student had tried to violate somebody earlier that day on the school bus on the way to school, and then came home and violated at least 3 other kids at the neighbor's house that day. Had offended on 2 other girls who used to live in the house where he offended on my son and the 2 little boys that were living there.
Oh my gosh.
So then we have, right, like now all of a sudden we've got 5, 6.
And you're an expert.
Yeah.
And I mean, you are at the peak of the game. And I can only imagine how the enemy would have wanted to undermine your sense of identity and self, because there's nothing more precious to us than our kids.
Yeah.
And so how did you process through that?
Well, it took a lot of time. What I thought I understood about forgiveness, kind of just got all blown up.
Yeah.
Right? Like, how do you forgive an offender, right? Like, I have to empathize. Yeah. Irv Washington at George Mason University, he's done a lot of work on forgiveness. As a researcher and psychologist, okay, I've got to empathize. Yeah. Right? Like, what's the story underneath the behavior? Yeah. Well, it turns out, like, alcoholic dad, some of the things that the kid's dad was sharing with other people in the neighborhood. Our kids run around naked at family reunions. I'm like, why is a kid that age not having clothes on? And why are the 12-year-olds running around without clothes on?
Yeah.
And like,
and what are they
something's not adding.
seeing?
A lot of the language that was used in the grooming process, like what the mom overheard specifically. So it wasn't like a child sharing this, like the mom overheard some of the language. This is a secret. We don't tell anybody else about this. We only do this here. I've got another friend coming over, and I'm going to play this game with him tomorrow. Grooming behavior, right? Like young kids don't just pick that up, right? Like kids don't just naturally groom.
Yeah.
And there was a pattern of other things that had happened earlier in the week that once you find out like your kid's been molested, all of a sudden it makes sense. Boundary violations and getting your kid to do stuff, right? Like throwing something in the mud, get that stick out of the mud for me. Like, no, I'm not going to get that stick out of the mud for me. I'm going to beat you up.
Wow.
Like, we knew about that, right? Like, but again, it's this. If I'd known that kid was going to be there, I never would have let my kid. Right? We're trying to be like the good Christian parents, like send our kids down, and like it's just their kids, and they're the same age. Like not knowing this a little bit older kid was also going to be there, and so I learned a lot about forgiveness. I learned a lot about my own propensity for anger at the injustice and the helplessness that a lot of our rage tends to originate out of.
Yeah.
I learned a lot about really, maybe 70 times 7 is about forgiving to the full measure that we're capable of forgiving, and then trusting that the remainder of it is covered by the Lord.
Yeah.
And that over time there is this perfect completion of forgiveness that I can sit here and tell you this story without falling apart like I would have 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Right? That healing happens, and there's hope that happens. When we lean in and we faithfully walk out that process.
Yeah.
Man, I tell you what though, like the sense of fraudulence, right? Like how am I going to help you if I can't even protect my kids?
Yeah.
Right? Lie from the enemy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the fear, right? Like the fear that backfills that space of, I remember making phone calls to our closest friends because we don't know, is this the first time this has happened? Like that's what we're hearing, but like, can I trust this? The phone calls with friends of like, I need you to do something really hard for me. I need you to go and ask your kids if there's been anything inappropriate that's happened at my house. Happened when we lost friends over that.
Wow.
We lost friends, Patrick, over that. Like in our traumatic experience, people were so affronted by us doing due diligence to make sure that their kids were safe that they are no longer friends with us today.
That is brutal.
Close friends, like very close friends. People who are now in pastoral ministry.
I just
who cut us off because they couldn't handle right the responsibility of going and asking their kids a delicate question about human sexuality. So we lost friendship in the church. In our neighborhood, I became the forgive my language, like I became the effing shrink. Like the whole neighborhood aligns.
That's what they called you.
That's what they called me.
Yeah.
So apart from a couple of families who we were very close to, the whole rest of our cul-de-sac, right, like is caretaking for the abuser's kids. And like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you called the police. I'm like, I'm a mandated reporter. I didn't have a choice.
Yes.
Right, I'm in this parent-therapist double bind, right? Like it doesn't matter if I'm the dad, like I'm a mandated reporter and I have to, I'm not gonna keep the secret. Right, like I'm not gonna perpetuate the unhealthy culture. And so just the loss, man, the emptiness of that space.
Gosh,
it's so hard for me.
I feel that just as we're talking about it, it's stirring all kinds of emotions that I feel for you.
Well, and just sharing my experience, my wife's experience, right? Probably harder. Like I've got professional colleagues to talk with this about and share this, and she's the one who's losing her closest friends, and just nobody, man. Like it's like the cockroaches when the light comes on, like scatter. Right. So her sense of desolation and loneliness and fear in that space, it was probably hard on her in many ways. The depression for her in that space, that sometimes coincides with kind of traumatic experiences. And then the fear of what does this mean about how we're to steward his sexual story?
Yeah, right.
Right, because some of those same fears that you mentioned earlier, like, is he going to violate someone's boundaries? Is he going to? Right, like, what is this going to awaken for him? What is this first experience going to do in his arousal template? From a power perspective, from a homoerotic perspective, right? Like, I take you down into specifics.
You bet.
And be like, okay, like, how do we walk this story out with him? it's fascinating, right? Like, but I want to speak to why Christian community is so important.
Yeah.
We didn't have a lot of Christian community, right? Not because we weren't plugged into the church, but because it was like, you talk about feeling like the leper.
Yeah.
Like I've not asked my kids how they felt in that time. They were relatively young to be socially attuned enough to recognize that things had changed. And they had other community, right? We had kind of compensatory community with the close friends in the neighborhood, and soccer became a huge part of it. But I remember the day, like my little boy came back, like on the back end of all this. It probably was, that happened at the end of the school year. It was that fall, so it was August or September. I carried the video on my phone, and that son, very gifted soccer player. So he was playing soccer. He was playing up a year with all of his kind of older friends. And I remember that in this game, he scores a goal, right? Like, and he'd just been somber. He had not been himself. There'd been nightmares. There'd been angry outbursts, like bedwetting, like just evidence of the trauma he'd experienced.
Yeah.
You know, for all the parents that are like, well, it's just boys being boys.
No, it's just
No, it's not.
No.
No, it's not. I'll show you mine, you show me yours. Maybe that's kids being kids. When there's grooming, when there's touching, when there's threats, when there's threats of violence. I don't care if they're kids, like, that's not boys being boys. That's not kids playing doctor.
Yeah.
It's something qualitatively different. And he scores this goal. And he did a pirouette, like he jumped and did a pirouette and spun, and all of the buddies on his team ran over, and like, he was back.
Wow.
And the nightmares went away.
Wow.
And the bedwetting went away. And like this sense of mastery of his body, some social validation, and the community, right? Like his peers in a healthy way coming around him.
Yes.
Like he came back. Gives me goosebumps.
God.
And what a blessing to have a video of that moment.
Oh my gosh.
Right? And I cry every time I watch it.
Yeah.
Because this son of mine was lost, but now he's found.
Yeah.
Like he went away
Wow.
for those months.
Which reminds us that we're wounded in relationships and we're healed in relationships.
Absolutely.
And there's something about the intimacy of shared experience that sports, in this case, was able to draw together. But the intimacy of a shared experience that actually reprocesses the trauma.
Yeah. And the humility in that space that it wasn't mine to give him.
Yeah.
His peers had to give it to him.
Amazing.
Right? Like I could structure the space and hold the space, but like I couldn't call him out of that as a dad. I loved on him, I laid with him, I prayed with him, I doted on it, like, but I didn't cause the wound.
Wow.
Right? Like, was that all positive? Absolutely. Like, it let him know he was cared for, but like what he needed in healing the wound was someone of the same age as the perpetrator to help him feel safe, to help him feel seen, to help him feel included, and that there wasn't going to be violation.
Wow.
Right? And I owe a debt of gratitude to two young ladies from church who have no idea. This will make me cry. Who have no idea what they did in helping him, right, navigate, I think, the intrapsychic impact of that moment. These two young ladies, when this son was young, just every time at church, he would see them and run to them, and even at the age he was at, like, would pick him up and swing him around, and like they just poured out unfettered affection.
Oh my gosh.
Which, again, the humility of like, I was doing that, but when it comes from someone that's not that primary attachment, like it just lands in a different way.
It does.
And I'm looking forward to the day that I can sit each of them down and tell them
The impact.
what they did. Like that is what the church is called to be. But when we don't talk about our wounds and our woundedness, right? Like, and in this case, like, it probably wouldn't be appropriate to talk about that wound, but like why it's so important for us to be nested in Christian community as we're navigating, right? Like, I know there's people listening who have a similar story.
Yes.
Who maybe don't have those moments of the community rallying around their child who's been impacted. Whose kids haven't yet received the gift of, that kind of secondary level of validation and affirmation that comes from peers and older kids they look up to. rather than like, you have to do this because you're my mom, you have to do this because you're my dad. Like, that is so critical. And I think that's a function of the church that we don't talk enough about.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I've been privileged with you to have heard the story, and yet it's so penetrating to hear it again. It's so human. It's so much a part of this world that we live in, and I feel the gravity of that, and I feel the compassion of God to us as humans and to you. And I cannot tell you enough how privileged I feel that you have opened and invited me into that part of your story. And of course, Rebecca's and the kids. And our audience, the LifePoint or the Red Ink family that we have, they all have now been gifted with your story. And I'm just so sorry for the brutality, the pain. I see you, I feel it. And I'm grateful that you and I get to do life and walk these things out, and even be able to gift people with your story.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, no, I hope that it is more than just a testimony of the pain and brokenness of the world, that it really is a testimony of God's mercy and God's grace, and how the body of Christ really does offer a context for healing.
Yes. It's beautiful. Well, we have so much more that we want to talk about on this topic. I'd like to dig further down into, where do we land on masturbation? Some are, even within Christianity, will say that yes, it's okay. What about, nocturnal emissions? What about, wet dreams?
Yeah.
What about even dig a little further into the LGBTQ and what is there to help everyone make sense of that. Love to talk a little bit about, birth control, not as whether birth control in a married couple is good or bad, but if you have a teenager that is active, is it wise to give them birth control when you know that they're not going to hold boundaries? And who are you to decide all that? I mean, this is conflict. There's tension that's in it. I'd like to dig down on that. I also want to talk about, as a parent, some of the profiles that create sexual dysfunction. Things like enmeshed mothers, rigid, religious, disengaged fathers, and how if you're a parent and you fit in that category, how you can grow, how you can begin to process out of that. I do want everybody to know that I parented my boys with a series of books that helped me tremendously. It came from Focus on the Family. I don't know that they were the originators of it, but that's where I got them. There was the first of 4 called The Story of Me that are for ages 3 to 5 years old. The beauty of these books is it gave me a path to walk on, and it gave me language that I could read to them, and then I could freestyle and talk about stuff that even as a pastor who is, I've got certain gifts from God to articulate and communicate, I felt incompetent until I got these books. And then it's like, oh, I see what I could do here. And it just made it normal. And the pressure was on the book. It wasn't on me. And the boys knew that as we grew up. The next one was Before I Was Born, ages 5 to 8. What's the Big Deal, ages 8 to 11. Facing the Facts, ages 11 to 14. And then when they got in their teenage years, there were other parts that I would do. How and when to tell your kids about sex, a lifelong approach to shaping your child's sexual character. They were profound because they hit on all these topics that we're going through, but I was able to collaborate and metabolize it with the boys. And again, it was something that normalized an ongoing conversation. And then, of course, your book. Again, if you would share the title of your book and where everybody can get it.
Yeah, sure. Angry Birds and Killer Bees, talking to your kids about sex. And it can be, I think at Walmart.com had it at one point, and any Christian book distributor on their online should have it.
Love it.
The Foundry is so Nazarene Publishing House became the Foundry. So certainly the Foundry would be the publisher's website, and it can be accessed and purchased there, or Amazon.
Awesome. I want to encourage everybody to get those. When we come back for another episode on this, we'll talk about all those things we mentioned. I want to talk about purity culture, where I kiss dating goodbye, and what should dating look like? And, because there's extremes on every side. And what are the differences in parenting sons versus parenting daughters? And then I want to talk about giving advice to a single mom. I would not in any way envy a mom who's single, who is trying to take a teenage boy in particular and help manage the mentoring of that. So what are they to do? So we're going to hit a lot of just amazing topics, and we're going to give everybody hope. As we wrap this up, we'll give everybody hope as to what to do if their child's stories has a chapter in it that feels very sexually inordinate, something that's broken, and because we all have hope. And again, what a great episode this is, but I can't wait till we jump on some of these others, and we'll do that in another episode.
Sounds great. Looking forward to it.